The farmhouse had always been loud, loud with laughter, the kind that shook the rafters and sent dust motes swirling in the late afternoon sun. Loud with the clatter of boots on hardwood as Sergeant Daniel Carter stomped in from the fields, his voice booming through the rooms like thunder. Loud with the rhythmic thwap, thwap, thwap of Rex's tail against the floor, as the German shepherd launched himself at his human, all 95 pounds of muscle and devotion, knocking Daniel back into the couch with a grunt and a laugh. Now, the house was silent. Not the peaceful quiet of a lazy Sunday morning, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a place where joy had packed its bags and left without warning. The kind of silence that made the old clock in the hallway sound like a hammer striking an anvil. Rex lay by the front door, his massive body curled into itself, nose pressed to the crack beneath the wood. His black and tan fur, usually gleaming like polished mahogany, was dull and matted. His ribs protruded in sharp relief beneath his skin, a living map of grief. Emily Carter knelt beside him, her knees pressing into the same floorboards where Daniel had taught their daughter to crawl. The steak in the bowl she held was prime cut, the kind Rex used to inhale before the plate even touched the ground. Now it might as well have been cardboard. "Come on, boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. She pushed the bowl closer, the scent of seared meat filling the space between them. "Just a bite, please." Rex didn't even twitch. His amber eyes, once so sharp they seemed to see straight into a man's soul, were fixed on the door, unblinking, unseeing, the way they'd been since the chaplain's car had pulled into the driveway 2 weeks ago. Emily's fingers trembled as she stroked the ridge of his spine. She could count every vertebra. The vet had come yesterday, had taken one look at Rex and sighed. "It's not medical," he'd said gently, packing up his stethoscope. "He's just waiting." A floorboard creaked upstairs. Emily's daughter, Lily, peeked around the corner, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. "Is Rex gonna be okay?" she asked, her voice small. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch swing where Daniel used to sit after dinner. Rex sprawled across his feet. The swing moved back and forth, like it was keeping time for a song only it could hear. Rex's ears pricked at the sound. For one heart-stopping second, Emily thought, hoped, he would get up. That he'd heard something she couldn't. That maybe, just maybe. But then his head drooped. His breath came out in a shuddering sigh that fogged the wood beneath his muzzle. And Emily knew. Somewhere in that big, beautiful heart of his, Rex had already crossed the bridge, or at least one paw was on it. He was just waiting for permission to let go. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his fur. It still smelled like Daniel, like pine and gun oil, and the cheap shampoo he'd used to bathe Rex every Sunday. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The clock ticked. The swing creaked. And the house stayed silent. The day Daniel brought Rex home, the farmhouse shook with new energy. Emily remembered it perfectly. The way the August heat had shimmered off the gravel driveway when that government-issued SUV pulled up. The back door swung open before the engine even died, and out bounded 85 pounds of pure, disciplined muscle. A black and tan German shepherd with ears like radar dishes and eyes that missed nothing. Daniel emerged slower, his left leg stiff from the shrapnel that nearly took it. "Emily, meet Sergeant Rexford," he'd said, voice thick with something deeper than pride. The dog sat instantly at his side, posture so perfect he might have been carved from stone. "This dog saved my life more times than I can count," Daniel continued, his calloused fingers disappearing into Rex's thick ruff. A shadow passed behind his eyes, the ghost of stories he wouldn't tell until years later, if ever. He's not just a dog, he's family. And God, did Rex prove it. Mornings began with Rex's cold nose prodding Daniel's stubbled cheek precisely at 5:30 a.m. No alarm needed. While Emily made coffee, she'd watch through the kitchen window as man and dog moved through their rituals. The barn check, Rex sweeping ahead of Daniel, clearing every shadowy corner before giving an all-clear bark. The feed run, carrying buckets together, Rex gripping the handle in his teeth like he'd done it since puppyhood. The porch sit, Daniel scratching behind those tall ears as Rex leaned against his bad leg, a living, breathing cane. The grocery store manager, old Mr. Higgins, had thrown up his hands after the third time catching Rex pushing a cart with his nose, while Daniel pretended to browse the cereal aisle. "That dog's got better manners than most customers," he'd grumbled, secretly slipping Rex treats under the counter. What stunned Emily most wasn't Rex's training, though his obedience was military precise, but the quiet conversations happening between him and Daniel when they thought no one was watching. A single glance exchanged across the yard, and Rex would suddenly trot to the tool shed, returning with Daniel's forgotten wrench. The subtle lift of Daniel's fingers during nightmares, and Rex would press his full weight along his human side, grounding him back to reality. The way Rex's tail would wag just once, a solemn, deliberate thump, when Daniel whispered, "Good boy," after particularly dark days. The first sign was the jaundice, then the weight loss. By the time the doctors said pancreatic cancer, Daniel's skin had taken on a sickly yellow hue that made Rex whine low in his throat whenever he looked at him. 6 months. That was the estimate. Daniel spent it doing 3 things: loving his family, putting his affairs in order, and ensuring Rex would be cared for. He recorded commands in his voice on Emily's phone, stockpiled Rex's favorite toys, even trained the dog to bring Emily her slippers when she cried, a trick they'd practiced in secret. The morning Daniel didn't wake up, Rex knew before anyone. He'd refused to leave the bedside for 12 hours prior, his body stretched along the length of Daniel's, rising and falling with each labored breath. When the hospice nurse finally confirmed what Rex already knew, the sound that tore from the dog's chest wasn't a howl, but something deeper, a primordial vibration that made the hair on Emily's arms stand up. Now, 3 weeks later, Rex moved through the house like a ghost. He sniffed Daniel's boots by the door every morning, waiting, pressed his nose to the bedroom window at 5:30 sharp, watching the driveway, lay across Daniel's side of the bed, inhaling deeply as if trying to conjure him from scent molecules alone. The steak Emily offered might as well have been sawdust. The vet said his physical health was fine, but the light behind those intelligent eyes, the spark that had seen through smoke and sandstorms to always find Daniel, had gone out. Rex wasn't sick. He was just done. And as Emily watched him stare at the door, his entire body tensed like a coiled spring, she realized with devastating clarity: some bonds aren't meant to be broken by something as trivial as death. The farmhouse kitchen smelled like defeat. Emily stared at the untouched bowls lining the counter, a culinary graveyard of everything that had ever made Rex's ears perk up. Grilled chicken still glistening with juices, beef stew with carrots cut into perfect little stars, just how Daniel used to prepare them. Peanut butter treats shaped like bones, their edges crisped golden brown in the oven. She'd even tried hand-feeding him this morning, kneeling on the cold linoleum, holding slivers of steak to his muzzle until her fingers went numb. Rex had simply turned his head away with a quiet sigh, his breath fogging the French doors where he kept vigil. "Come on, boy," she whispered now, pressing her forehead against his. His fur smelled like dust and sadness. "You've got to fight a little longer." But Rex's eyes, those brilliant amber eyes that had once tracked insurgents through sandstorms, remained fixed on the driveway. Waiting. Always waiting. Mark found her in the barn later, elbow deep in storage bins. "Em?" His voice was gentle in that way that made her want to scream. "Doc Wilson called back. He said—" "I know what he said." She yanked out a box labeled Daniel's Gear with too much force, sending dust motes swirling in the late afternoon light. The vet's words played on loop in her head. At this stage, we'd be relieving his suffering, not causing it. Her hands trembled as she unearthed Daniel's old army duffel. The fabric still carried traces of his scent, gun oil and that cheap sandalwood soap he'd loved. For a wild moment, she considered letting Rex bury himself in it. Maybe then he'd finally sleep. But no, that would be cruel. Like giving a dying man a photograph of water. Mark crouched beside her, his work-roughened hands covering hers. "We've tried everything, sweetheart. The walks, Not everything." Emily's head snapped up. A memory flickered. Daniel laughing as Rex catapulted himself across the yard toward a familiar figure in ACU's. James. Finding Captain James Ruiz took 3 phone calls and 2 favors called in from Fort Bragg. When Emily finally got through, the line crackled with overseas static. "Ma'am, I'm in Kuwait until— Rex is dying." The words tore out of her like shrapnel. "He won't eat, won't move. He's just waiting for Daniel." A beat of silence, then the sound of papers shuffling, a chair scraping. "I'll be there tomorrow." James arrived in uniform. The second his boots hit the gravel, Rex's entire body stiffened. His nose quivered, once, twice, before he was on his feet with a speed that belied his starvation. Emily's breath caught as Rex staggered forward, his gait unsteady but determined. James dropped to one knee, his posture perfect, just like in the field. "Hey, Sergeant Rexford." His voice cracked on the rank. "Reporting for duty, sir." What happened next would stay burned in Emily's memory forever. 1. The recognition. Rex's ears swiveled forward at the familiar cadence, that particular rhythm of words only Special Forces dogs learned. 2. The inspection. His wet nose traced James's sleeve, pausing at the spot where Daniel's name tape should have been. The breakthrough. A whine so deep it vibrated the air between them as Rex finally pressed his forehead against James's chest. James didn't pet him, didn't baby talk, just held out a single treat, the exact military-issue biscuit they'd used in Afghanistan. Rex took it gingerly, his tail giving one solemn wag. "Good boy," James murmured in that tone soldiers reserve for fallen comrades. "Good soldier." And just like that, after 8 days of silent vigil, Rex lay down at James's feet and slept. The phone trembled in Emily's hand, its cracked screen reflecting the hollows of her face. She'd scrolled through Daniel's contacts 3 times before landing on the name Captain James Rivera, 10th Mountain Division. The photo showed a younger James, his arms slung around Daniel's shoulders, both men squinting against a desert sun, their fatigues coated in fine dust. Between them sat Rex, alert and proud, wearing a tactical vest. She pressed call before she could second-guess herself. The line rang once, twice. Then, "Emily?" James's voice was rougher than she remembered, like gravel dragged over steel. There was noise in the background, shouting, the rumble of engines. Somewhere far from home. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Her words came out in a rush, raw and unfiltered. "James, I need your help. It's Rex." A pause, a sharp inhale. Then quieter, as if he already knew. "He's not eating, is he?" The accuracy of his guess shattered her. She sagged against the kitchen counter, her fingers leaving smudges on Daniel's dog-eared recipe book, the one with Rex's favorite peanut butter treats circled in red. "He's just waiting for Daniel." Her voice broke on the name. Outside, Rex lay motionless by the porch steps, his nose pointed toward the empty driveway. Another silence stretched between them, filled only by the static of distance and the faint hum of military life on James's end. Emily could almost see him, jaw clenched, one hand rubbing the scar on his forearm, the one he'd gotten pulling Rex out of a collapsed building in Fallujah. Then, "I'll be there tomorrow." No hesitation, no conditions, just 5 words that carried the weight of a promise. Emily opened her mouth to protest. He was stationed overseas. He had duties. It was too much. But James was already speaking again, his voice dropping into the familiar cadence of a mission briefing. "Tell him." A rustling sound, like he was shifting the phone. "Tell him I'm bringing his vest." The line went dead. Emily slid down the cabinet until she hit the floor, the phone clutched to her chest. Through the window she watched Rex lift his head slightly, his ears twitching as if he'd heard something on the wind. A shadow crossed his sunken eyes, something almost like recognition. Then slowly his tail thumped once against the wooden step. Thud. A heartbeat. A promise. James was coming. The first gray light of dawn was just creeping over the fields when tires crunched on gravel. Emily, who hadn't slept, saw the headlights slice through the kitchen window before the engine even cut off. She wiped her hands on her jeans, already stained with tears and coffee, and opened the front door before James could knock. He stood on the porch like a ghost materializing from the mist, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the pinkening sky. The years had carved new lines into his face, silver threading through his close-cropped hair, but his posture remained rigid, back straight, chin up, the way only career soldiers stood. His eyes, dark and sharp as flint, met Emily's for a brief moment before darting past her, searching. "Where is he?" James's voice was rougher than over the phone, frayed at the edges from what Emily guessed had been a long, sleepless flight. She stepped aside without a word, nodding toward the living room. Rex lay exactly where he'd been for days, curled on Daniel's old fleece blanket by the fireplace, his muzzle resting on his paws. He didn't lift his head at the sound of the door, didn't twitch at the new voice, just stared at the empty recliner where Daniel used to sit, his ribcage rising and falling in shallow, listless breaths. James exhaled sharply through his nose, a sound Emily recognized from the rare times Daniel had let his emotions slip through. He set his duffel bag down with deliberate slowness, the heavy canvas hitting the hardwood with a thud that made Rex's ear flicker, just once. Then James knelt. Not the way civilians did, with their awkward crouches and creaking knees, but the way soldiers knelt in the field, one knee down, back straight, balanced and ready. His hands moved to the duffel's zipper, the sound abnormally loud in the silent house. The moment the bag opened, Rex's entire body stiffened. Emily saw it before she smelled it, the way Rex's nostrils flared, his dry nose quivering. Then the scent hit her too, gunpowder and sweat, leather, and the faintest trace of Daniel's sandalwood aftershave. It clung to the worn military vest James was carefully extracting, its fabric faded from years of sun and sand, its Velcro patches frayed at the edges. Rex jerked upright so fast his claws scrabbled against the floorboards. A strangled sound burst from his throat, not a bark, not a whine, but something raw and guttural that seemed to tear its way out of his chest. He lurched forward, his weakened legs trembling, and shoved his entire face into the vest James now held open. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth as Rex inhaled in frantic, desperate bursts, his entire body quaking. His tail, limp for days, gave a single weak thump against the floor. James didn't pet him, didn't speak, just held the vest steady as Rex buried deeper into it, his breaths coming in ragged pants. When James finally did speak, his voice was thick. "Yeah, boy, I know." Then, Rex pulled back. His clouded eyes, dull for weeks, suddenly focused with startling clarity on James's face. For a long moment, man and dog just looked at each other, some silent understanding passing between them. And then Rex turned, staggered past Emily, and walked, slowly, unsteadily, but with purpose, to his food bowl in the kitchen. The crunch of kibble between his teeth was the most beautiful sound Emily had ever heard. The first morning after James's arrival, Emily woke to an unfamiliar sound. Not silence, not the heavy, suffocating quiet that had filled the house for weeks, but the steady crunch, crunch, crunch of kibble being chewed. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, and found Rex standing over his bowl in the kitchen, eating methodically. Not with his old enthusiasm, but with purpose. The military vest lay draped across his back like a weighted blanket, its straps brushing the floor. James was already there, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee in hand. He met Emily's gaze and gave her the smallest nod. Not a celebration, but an acknowledgement. "We're not out of the woods yet," that nod said, "but we've cleared the first obstacle." Recovery wasn't linear. Some days, Rex would follow Emily around the farm with the vest secured snugly around his chest. His ears perked forward as he helped with chores, carrying tools in his mouth, nudging stray chickens back into their coop. Other days, he'd lie motionless by the front door, his nose pressed to the crack beneath it, the vest clutched between his paws like a child's security blanket. James became a fixture at the farm every weekend, his olive-green Tacoma kicking up dust on the long driveway every Saturday morning. He never arrived empty-handed. Week 1. A box of military-issue dog treats that made Rex's tail wag for the first time in months. Week 3. Daniel's old field notebook, its pages filled with sketches of Rex in various poses. He drew during downtime, James explained. Week 5. A DVD of their unit's homecoming ceremony, where Rex had marched proudly beside Daniel in formation. Their walks became rituals. James would clip the vest onto Rex, and the three of them would trek through the fields where Daniel had taught Rex to herd sheep. As they walked, James would talk, his voice taking on the cadence of a man recounting sacred texts. "That time in Kandahar?" James said one evening, pausing to let Rex sniff a particular oak tree. "We were pinned down for 6 hours, took enemy fire from 3 directions. Rex here?" He scratched behind the dog's ears. "Dragged Corporal Jenkins 200 yards to safety with a bullet graze on his own shoulder. Daniel nearly court-martialed the medic who tried to treat him before the men." Rex's head lifted at Daniel's name, his eyes clearer than Emily had seen them in months. James continued, quieter now. "Your dad called him the best damn soldier in the unit. Said he had more courage in one paw than most men had in their entire—" Rex suddenly licked James's hand. A single, deliberate swipe of his tongue across the scarred knuckles. James's breath hitched. For a moment Emily thought she saw tears in his eyes, but then he cleared his throat and straightened the vest on Rex's back. "Yeah, he knows." The real breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday in April. Emily was in the barn when she heard it, a sound so familiar yet so long absent that she dropped the feed bucket with a clatter. Barking. Not the anxious yips Rex had occasionally mustered since Daniel's death, but full-throated, joyous barks, the kind that used to echo across the farm when Daniel came home from deployments. She ran outside to find Rex tearing across the pasture, the vest secured snugly around his torso, chasing after James with a tennis ball in his mouth. James was laughing, actually laughing, as Rex skidded to a stop in front of him, dropping the ball at his feet and bouncing on his front paws in the universal doggy signal for "throw it again." Emily's knees gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, her vision blurring. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. More like relief so profound it bordered on pain. Because in that moment, watching Rex play with the same abandon he'd had before, she finally believed he might survive this. That night, for the first time since Daniel's death, Rex didn't sleep with the vest. He curled up at the foot of Emily's bed instead, his chin resting on her ankle, his breaths deep and even. When she reached down to stroke his head, his tail thumped once against the comforter. Thud. A heartbeat. A promise. They were going to be okay. The late summer air hung thick with the scent of cut grass and impending rain as Emily stepped onto the porch, 2 glasses of sweet tea sweating in her hands. Golden light spilled across the weathered planks, painting everything in hues of honey and amber. James sat in Daniel's old rocking chair, the one no one had dared touch until now, his boots propped on the railing. Rex lay sprawled at his feet, the military vest still secured around his torso, but no longer clutched like a lifeline. His tail thumped lazily against the floorboards as Emily approached, the sound a far cry from the desperate, mournful taps of months past. "You saved him," Emily said softly, handing James a glass. The ice cubes clinked like wind chimes as he took it. James shook his head, the fading sunlight catching the silver at his temples. "Nah." His calloused fingers found their familiar place behind Rex's ears, scratching the spot that always made the dog's hind leg twitch. "Daniel did." He took a slow sip of tea, his gaze drifting across the fields where fireflies were just beginning to blink awake. He just needed to know it was okay to keep going. As if on cue, Rex lifted his head, his ears pricking forward. The vest shifted with the movement, its worn fabric whispering against his fur. But it was his eyes that struck Emily, clear and bright, the fog of grief finally lifted. They reflected the sunset like liquid gold, full of quiet understanding. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Daniel grinning as Rex herded the sheep with military precision. "That dog? He's got more honor in his paw than most men have in their whole bodies." Emily's breath caught. The pieces clicked together with sudden, aching clarity. Why James had come without hesitation, why the vest had worked when nothing else could, why Rex had responded to this man above all others. It wasn't just about the scent or the memories. It was permission. James, the last living piece of Daniel's military family, the brother who had served beside them both, had given Rex what Emily couldn't: the soldier's blessing to stand down, to let go, to live. Rex sighed deeply, his head dropping back onto James's boot with a contented thump. The vest rose and fell with his breathing, no longer a shroud, but a second skin. Emily wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, surprised to find them damp. The truth settled over her like the coming twilight, gentle and inevitable. Love doesn't end. It doesn't vanish with last breaths or fade with funeral flowers. It lingers in the way James still salutes when he hears taps on the radio, in the way Rex now brings Emily Daniel's old slippers when it rains, in the way the vest hangs by the door, ready for whenever Rex needs a reminder. It just changes shape. Across the field, the first lightning bugs sparked to life, their glow mirroring the stars just beginning to pierce the violet sky. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called, a mournful, beautiful sound that seemed to say, "Remember me, but live." And as Rex's tail thumped once more against the porch, Emily finally believed it.